written our program and we've got no spelling mistakes, no syntax errors, no logical errors, and no runtime errors. We're good to go. We think the program's working. We now need to test it. So we need some suitable test data, and the kind of test data that we need is we need to test it for valid data, that it does what it's meant to do. We need to test it for out of range data, so that we know what's happening, and if it crashes because of out of range data, we need to fix these problems. We need to check boundary values. A little harder to define those and look at them in this program, but we'll try. We need to check for null values. Now that's why I put this line of code in here where I input something. Up until that point I really couldn't check for null values. And really null values is also known as presence check, really. And finally, invalid data. So let's try some valid data. What do I mean by valid data? Well, I'm really checking on this list. So valid data, virtually anything really, but definitely one of these numbers. So I might want to check if it's got the number 18 in. So when I run my program, wrong side. When I run my program, if I type in 18, what happens? It works as expected. It's exactly as expected. I needed it to find it at position 5. If I try 99, it works as expected. It's found it. So that's pretty good. And I could do that for all these numbers. I probably wouldn't. I mean, if you've got a list of 1 million items, then you're not going to run a list of, or 1 million tests to try everything out. You try certain ones. So I've tried values that I know are in the list. That's called valid data, in range data. Now I'm going to try out of range data. Now there's a couple of out of range data. There's one here, 19. It's not in the list, so it's out of range, 19. And it says item 19 not found. So it's worked. The test data is there. It's done what it's meant to. It hasn't crashed, which is pretty good. Another out of range one, what I'm going to do is kind of do the boundary values at the same time. I'm going to check what happens if I put in something beyond the end of this list, like 100, or something before this one, such as 1. So they're boundaries. That's where the list starts and where the list ends, or whatever you're looking at. It doesn't necessarily have to be a list or an array. It could be a roll of a dice. So if you're going to roll a dice, you're going to have values 1 to 6. You'll have an error if you get a 7, but you need to check that you're getting 1 to 6. So here we go. Let's first check the 1. It says item 1 not found, which is fine. It's passed that test. It's as expected. And I'm going to check for 100. It's fine. It's passed that test. It's as expected. So basically I've just tested the out of range and the boundary values. The next one I'm going to type in is invalid data. So what is invalid data? Well, here I'm expecting a number. So what would be invalid? Well, that would be a letter. So I'm going to type A, and the program crashes. Now, that's pretty much as expected on my test. I expected it to crash, so that's okay. But in reality, I would go back to my program and write some code to prevent that from happening, and then test it all again. And we did that in the game, where we inputted a number for the size of the board, the number of chests and the number of bandits. We wrote a special routine just to accept a number and ignore everything else. So we can do that. I'm not going to do it in here because I don't really want to add too much to this code. But if you want to know that, go back and have a look at those videos, or drop me a line and I'll do a little video demonstrating that. So I'm going to run my program again now. Let's close this window so it starts at the top. So that was invalid data. I expected it to crash and it did. I should have said crash. Now, I'm going to try it for null data. Null data is not typing anything, just pressing enter. And I expect it to crash because it hasn't got a number. And now we go. We'll get some strange error messages. Don't worry too much about what they are. You will get used to those in time. But it crashed as expected. Again, well, let me just write the code to actually get around that. So quickly try indent, accept. There you go. And pretty much, actually, if I cut that and put all that in the try block, getting messy, which is why I didn't want to do it in the first place. Getting really messy. Print, please try again. So that should really handle if I type in a letter or nothing at all. So let's try that out. Hopefully it will work. I've made a mistake. Oh, I've made a syntax error. That's nice. Accept. I can't see that one. Unless, let's dedent it. And then indent. I've missed off her. Yeah, that's what it was. I just saw it before. Right, try again. Please enter a value to search for. It says please try again. So I've written try and accept and put my code in there to prevent me entering invalid data and no data at all. So here's my null value. So I fixed that. So that's what I would look for in my test data, is things that are invalid, and then I would fix my program to make sure that didn't happen. So that's test data. So in the previous video we looked at the three kinds of errors: syntax, logic and runtime, which you should have a good idea about. If not, go back over the video. In this lesson we've looked at choosing suitable test data. Now I could choose suitable test data for all of these bits and pieces as well. I only chose to look at this. It's up to you what you do. You may be tested in the exam on something similar. Be asked what the boundary values are, be asked what a null value is, etc. But we checked it for valid data. That means data that was in the list. We checked it for out of range data. That's data that's not in the list. Did it do what it was supposed to do? That's the important part. We checked it for the boundary values, which was beyond the end of each one of those. Did it do what it was meant to do, or did it not? We check for null values when we don't enter anything at all. We just press enter. Does it do what we intended? Well, it didn't, but then we fix the program. And the same for invalid data. Did we try to enter something in here that was invalid, such as a letter when it expected a number? We did to begin with, and it crashed the program, but then we fixed it. So, and then we tested again. So that that's testing and errors in a nutshell. And we did all of that as terminal or final testing. In other words, the program was already written. I know we added little bits of programming, but mainly all of our programming was done. So when we were programming, that was when we were doing iterative testing. Don't forget, I've incorrectly used the words formative and summative. That's how I was taught them, but the words have changed. So I think we're into sorting now. So a little bit more coding and writing things down by hand for you to learn.